Why was she adjusting her vest for the third time when everyone else was already in position? Lieutenant Sarah Chun stood beneath the unforgiving sun, her fingers tugging at the straps like they were the only thing keeping her together around her. Alpha Team moved with easy confidence, laughing, checking gear, tapping shoulders. But Sarah felt the sharp reminder under her ribs with every inhale. The scar tissue pressed like a secret, the pain spreading like fire. She didn't flinch. Didn't show it? She never did. 15 years of hiding had made her a master at silence. The radio cracked. Alpha Team, hold positions. Sergeant Martinez's voice echoed sharp and sure. A man born for command. Sarah forced her shoulders back, focusing on the compound ahead, the shapes moving in the distance. This was just a simulation, just training. No real bullets, no real threat. But her body didn't care. The wound inside her remembered every real moment. Why today? Why now, when the Admiral himself was watching? High above in the observation tower, Admiral James Morrison scanned the teams through binoculars. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing when he spotted Sarah. She was moving, yes, but something about the way she carried herself made him pause, too. Stiff, breaths too shallow. He'd seen it 1,000 times in 1,000 soldiers. The subtle shift when something was wrong. Begin simulation. The compound exploded into sound and smoke. Blank rounds cracked like thunder. Grenades belched white haze. Boots pounded dirt. Commands flew. Chaos, controlled yet wild, filled the air. Sarah's heartbeat merged with the noise. She led Alpha Team forward. Gestures sharp, calculated, every movement measured, precise. Her team trusted her implicitly. She was the one who always had the angle, the timing, the courage. She was the one who never missed. But something was unraveling. The pain began as a needle. By the time she reached the first building, it was a blade. By the second, fire. She pressed her palm discreetly to her side, just for a second, like a nervous tick. When she pulled it away, the warmth spreading beneath her uniform told her the truth she feared most. Blood. Not here. Not now. Not in front of them. She clenched her jaw, stepped harder, willing her body to obey. Through the haze of smoke, she caught the mock hostages. Inside the building, soldiers pretending, guns pointed, waiting for her move. She raised her hand, fingers curling into the breach signal, and the world tilted. Her knees buckled. The dirt rushed up. She slammed one hand against the wall, the other pressing desperately against her side, trying to hold herself together. Darkness edged her vision. She heard her name shouted, distorted, unreal. Chun is down! Chun is down! Boots skidded, arms grabbed her shoulders. Corporal Williams dropped beside her. Panic in his voice, her team circled tight, weapons aimed outward, as though this was no drill but a battlefield. Up in the tower, Morrison froze. For a second, he didn't believe what he saw. The strongest officer on his roster, the one who'd carried impossible missions, was on the ground, bleeding. Broken in front of everyone, his stomach turned cold. His voice barked into the headset before his mind. Even caught up. Medical to Building 7 now. By the time Morrison reached her, medics were crouched over her body. Her face was pale, her lips tight with stubborn denial. She kept pushing their hands away. I'm fine. It's nothing. I can finish. The Admiral knelt. Close now, he could see what she was hiding. The sweat she couldn't disguise. The tremor in her hands. The blood she was trying to conceal with sheer willpower. This isn't a pulled muscle, he said quietly. His voice carried authority sharpened over decades. You're going to medical, now. That's in order. 4. The first time, Sarah's eyes faltered. Her shoulders sagged. She knew the tone. There was no fighting it. As they lifted her, her gaze met Morrison's. For a fraction of a second, he saw past the soldier's mask. Fear. Not fear of death. Not fear of pain, but fear of being seen, of being discovered. And he realized this wasn't just an injury. This was something else. something she'd carried far longer than anyone knew. The medical bay's lights were merciless. Fluorescent white pressed down on every surface, turning blood into something metallic and sterile. Sarah sat on the examination table. Uniform jacket gone, undershirt crimson at her side. The antiseptic burned her nose. The air felt too thin, Doctor. Rebecca Martinez moved efficiently, gloves snapping, tools clinking against metal trays. She had treated hundreds of soldiers, but rarely Sarah Chun. Once for a cut, once for a required exam, that was it. Sarah avoided doctors like landmines. Admiral Morrison stood at the door, arms crossed. His eyes locked on her like she was a puzzle demanding to be solved. He didn't look at her as an officer now. He looked at her as something unknown. "Lieutenant," Dr. Martinez said, voice steady, "I need you to remove your shirt so I can examine the injury properly." Sarah froze. Her fingers hovered at the hem of her undershirt, trembling. This was the moment she had feared more than any battlefield, any mission. 15 years of control unraveled in a single request. She shook her head. "It's fine. Just strain. Maybe some ibuprofen. I can." "Chun." Morrison's voice cut like a blade. Not loud, just final. "The shirt now." Her lungs tightened. She looked up, met his steel-gray stare, and saw there was no escape. So she lifted the fabric, slowly, as though peeling away her armor. Silence filled the room. The doctor's breath caught audibly. The Admiral's clipboard slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a sound that echoed like a shot. Her torso was a map of survival. Scars laced her ribs in jagged lines, some thin and surgical, others raw and cruel. A body that had been broken and remade. Not once, many times, 17 times. The fresh tear was nothing compared to the old. Battleground carved into her flesh. Morrison stared, frozen. He had seen countless wounds in his career. He had seen bodies destroyed by war. But this wasn't war. This was something else. The pattern of scars struck him like lightning. He knew them, knew what they meant. A memory slammed into him with such force, he gripped the chair for balance. Rain, a highway twisted in wreckage. A small voice calling for her mother, a girl trapped. Ribs crushed, eyes wide with terror. His heart thudded. He whispered words he hadn't spoken in decades. Highway 9, 23 years ago. Sarah's head snapped up. Her eyes widened, breath-catching. No one knew about Highway 9. No one. "You were trapped in the back seat," Morrison said, voice rough. "Your parents. They didn't make it. I held your hand. I told you. You would survive." Her lips trembled. She whispered a name she hadn't heard in 2 decades. "Emma Rodriguez." The room spun. Dr. Martinez blinked, confused, sensing something monumental unfolding before her. Morrison stared at Sarah like he was seeing a ghost. "I promised you," he said, voice cracking. "I promised you'd be strong, that you'd live, that you'd do amazing things." Tears slipped down Sarah's face. She nodded, shaking her voice barely audible. "I kept that promise." And in that sterile, bright room, the strongest soldier on his base broke, not from pain, but from recognition. She wasn't just his officer. She was the little girl whose hand he had once held in twisted metal, whose cries had haunted his nights, and now fate had brought them face to face again. But something was still hidden, something she hadn't told him, not yet. What do you say when the truth you've hidden for 15 years is written across your skin? Sarah sat motionless under the fluorescent lights, every scar exposed. Her undershirt bunched in her lap like a flag of surrender. She wanted to cover herself, to turn away, but she didn't. Shame was weakness. She had learned long ago that the only way to survive was to stare straight into the horror. Dr. Martinez's voice broke the silence first, gentle, professional, but trembling at the edges. "How many surgeries?" Sarah didn't hesitate. She had rehearsed the number too many times. 17. The doctor's eyes softened. "All before you turned 15. A slow nod. What happened to you? Sarah's jaw tightened. She hated this moment. The shift in people's eyes. The pity. The reframing of her from soldier to victim. A car accident, she said flatly. When I was 7. But the Admiral's face had gone white. His knuckles gripped a chair like he was bracing against a storm. Rain, twisted metal, a child's sobs in the dark. He could still smell the gasoline, hear the cutting tools whining against steel. He could still feel the small, trembling hand. In his own, he spoke before he even realized it. Highway 9, 23 years ago. Sarah's head snapped toward him, her heart hammered. How could he know? She'd buried Emma Rodriguez when she turned 18. Shed the name like a skin that no longer fit. No one knew the details. No one. You were trapped in the back seat, Morrison said, his voice rough with memory. Your parents didn't make it. Your chest was crushed. You couldn't breathe. And he faltered, emotion catching in his throat. I crawled inside. I held your hand. Doctor. Martinez froze, realizing she was witnessing something profound. Sarah's breath caught. She whispered, the name burning her tongue like fire. You were there. Her voice cracked into silence. Morrison's eyes never left hers. Emma Rodriguez. The name landed like a blow. It wasn't just a name. It was the child she had killed off so she could survive. Hearing it now shattered the soldier's armor she had worn for 15 years. No one calls me that, she whispered. Tears burned her cheeks. Not anymore. But Morrison remembered. He remembered crawling into that wreck. Rain soaking through his uniform, promising a little girl she wasn't going to die. He remembered the way she had begged him not to leave. And now, she was sitting in front of him, alive, scarred, and still fighting. He took a slow breath, forcing control back into his voice. You were 7 years old, trapped in twisted metal. You asked me if your parents were coming back. Sarah closed her eyes. The memory she had fought to bury tore through her like glass. She could hear it again. Clear as yesterday. Are Mommy and Daddy coming back? She had asked, and his voice had broken when he said no. And then you asked me, Morrison said softly, if I would stay with you instead. You said you didn't want to be alone. Her tears spilled faster. She had never forgotten those words, but she had spent years pretending they belonged to another child, another life. Morrison's voice trembled. I stayed until they pulled you free. I rode in the ambulance. I held your hand through 3 surgeries. Do you remember? The teddy bear? Sarah gasped. Mr. Anchors? His composure cracked. He laughed once, broken, shaking his head. You named him that because I told you sailors use anchors to hold steady in storms. Sarah nodded through her tears. I still have him. He's in my quarters. He's the only thing I kept from before. Silence, thick, heavy, charged with 23 years of memory crashing into the present. Dr. Martinez turned away, giving them space. Though her mind was reeling, she had thought she was treating a wounded soldier. Instead, she was watching a story unfold that belonged in legend. Finally, Morrison spoke again. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah's lips trembled. She wanted to answer, but the words tangled in her throat. You requested assignment here, he said, realization dawning. 3 years ago. You've been under my command all this time. Why didn't you say anything? Her voice came out small, stripped of all the soldier's steel. Because I had to prove it first. I had to prove I was worth saving. The words sliced him deeper than any knife. You were already worth saving, he said fiercely. You were. 7 years old. You held on for over an hour in that wreck. You were braver than most soldiers I've commanded. But Sarah shook her head. Her body trembled. The facade she had carried for so long crumbled piece by piece. I'm not brave. I'm broken, she whispered. I've been broken since. That night, I've been pretending so long that I almost believed it. But I'm not who they think I am. Her fists clenched against her thighs. Her scars seemed to pulse under the harsh lights. Morrison stepped closer. His voice dropped. quiet, but unshakable. "You're not broken. You're rebuilt. There's a difference." The words landed like a lifeline. For a moment, she let herself believe them. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. But truth always demands more. "Doctor." Martinez cleared her throat gently, stepping forward, her tone carefully professional. "Admiral, I need to examine her properly. And given what I see here, we need to talk about her full medical history." Sarah's eyes went wide. Panic flooded her face. This was the moment she dreaded even more than the scars. The exposure of her secret, the one that could end everything. Morrison saw it immediately. This wasn't fear of pain. This was fear of losing her career. "What aren't you telling us, Sarah?" He asked softly, not Emma, Sarah, because she needed to be the soldier she had fought to become. Her fists clenched tighter. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The surgeries saved my life, but they couldn't fix everything. Some of the damage was permanent, Doctor." Martinez leaned closer. "What kind of permanent damage?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Chronic pain, nerve damage, scar tissue that tears, muscle spasms that can be disabling." Morrison's chest tightened. His voice sharpened. "How often?" "It varies, months without, then sometimes." She gestured at her bleeding side. "Like today." The Admiral's face darkened. "And how have you been managing this?" "On active duty?" Her eyes closed. She knew this was the end. She let the words fall like stones. "Pain medication, not prescribed, black market." The silence was deafening, Doctor. Martinez's voice cracked with alarm. "Sarah, do you have any idea how dangerous?" "Yes," she snapped, breaking at last. Her voice rose, jagged with 15 years of desperation. "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I haven't weighed the risks every single day? But what was my choice? Report it and get discharged. Lose the only family I've ever had? The only identity I've built? This uniform is all I am." Her chest heaved. The words spilled like blood. Morrison stared at her. He didn't see the flawless soldier from his records. He saw the terrified child in the wreck, clinging to his hand, begging not to be left behind. "How long have you been hiding this?" His voice was low, dangerous. Her eyes burned. "Since basic training." The weight of it crashed through the room. 15 years of falsified medical records, illegal drugs, deception at the highest level, by every rule. She should be court-martialed. Discharged, destroyed. But Morrison wasn't just an admiral in that moment. He was the man who had once promised a dying child she would not be alone. He stared at her for a long time. The silence stretched tight as wire. Finally, he asked a question that pierced everything. "Why the Navy?" Her lips trembled. She met his eyes, and in that moment, he saw the truth that had carried her all these years. "Because a Navy officer saved my life, because he promised me I could be strong, that I could do amazing things. I wanted to become someone worthy of that promise." The words hung between them, sharp, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. And Admiral Morrison realized with a sickening clarity the promise he had made 23 years ago had given her life, her purpose, her career, but it had also built the very lie that was now collapsing around her. What he didn't know was how far she was willing to go to keep it. Not yet. What happens when the truth you've buried begins to devour the life you built on top of it? The examination room was heavy with silence. Sarah sat rigid on the table, her scars bared, her secrets spilling into the air like smoke no one could breathe through. Admiral Morrison stood near the wall, eyes locked on her like a man staring down fate itself. "Doctor." Martinez shifted closer, a voice calm but edged with urgency. "Lieutenant, these symptoms, this bleeding, the spasms, often do they interfere with your duty?" Sarah's fingers dug into her thighs, fists clenched. "Not often," she whispered. "I've hidden it. I've pushed through." "How often?" Morrison repeated, his tone sharper now. the tone of a commander demanding the unvarnished truth. Her shoulders sagged, the fight drained from her eyes. Months sometimes without an episode, but lately, they're closer, stronger, harder to control. Martinez exchanged a grim look with Morrison. There was no mistaking it. Her condition wasn't fading into the background. It was worsening. And how? Morrison pressed, his voice low, steady, dangerous. Have you been hiding it? Sarah's throat closed, but the truth was already out, and lies could not stitch the wound she'd opened. Painkillers, off the books, black market. The words dropped like lead. Doctor. Martinez swore under her breath, her professional composure. Cracking. Do you understand the risk? You don't know the dosage, the purity, the interactions with your body. You're gambling with your life every time you swallow a pill. Sarah's eyes flashed with desperation. And what was my alternative? To walk away? To lose everything I've fought for? You don't understand. The Navy is all I have. Without it, I'm just a broken foster kid no one wanted. Her voice fractured, every word a confession she had sworn never to speak aloud. Morrison stepped closer, his shadow falling across her scarred torso. His voice was soft, but iron lay beneath it. How long have you been doing this? Her eyes flicked up to his, trembling. Since basic training. The admission hit like a detonation. 15 years of falsified medical records. Hidden pain, illegal drugs. By every regulation. By every rule he had sworn to uphold, this was grounds for immediate discharge, even criminal charges. But Morrison wasn't just an admiral in that moment. He was a man staring at the little girl whose hand he had once held in the wreckage of a crushed car. And now the child was begging him not to abandon her again. Doctor? Martinez broke the silence, her voice clinical but gentle. Lieutenant, you need proper management, real treatment. This condition isn't going away. It will only worsen. Sarah's lips trembled, but her voice was fierce. I've managed it. For 15 years. I've led missions. I've never failed. Until today. You didn't even know. Until today, Morrison echoed. His words heavy with meaning. And today was only a simulation. The unspoken truth hung between them. If this had been combat, if her body had failed in the middle of a mission, men could have died. Entire operations could have collapsed. Sarah's breath caught. She knew it. She had always known it. She had just never let herself say it out loud. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. The antiseptic smell pressed down on them like suffocating air. Then, Morrison asked the question he had been circling since the moment her shirt came off. Why the Navy, Sarah? Why us? You could have chosen any branch, any path. Why this one? Her eyes lifted, glistening. For once, she didn't try to hide. She let the truth cut free. Because a Navy officer saved my life. Because he told me I could be strong. That I could do amazing things, and I wanted to become someone worthy of that promise. Her words cracked through the Admiral's armor. His throat tightened, his chest heavy. She hadn't just built her career on discipline or ambition. She had built it on him, on his voice in the wreckage, on the promise he had made to a dying child. And now, that promise threatened to destroy her. Sarah looked down, her voice smaller. Now, I wanted to tell you, I almost did, but I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't remember me. Or worse, that you would, and that I wouldn't be enough. Morrison exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Not enough? Sarah, you're the finest officer I've ever commanded. Your record is flawless. Your leadership unmatched. You've exceeded every standard. Her voice broke. Because I cheated, because I lied, because I'm not really fine. The words tumbled out like stones spilling from a broken dam. I've been broken since that night. I've been hiding it so long I almost believed it myself. But I'm not the soldier they think I am. I'm a fraud. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. He saw past the tears, past the scars, past the fear. He saw the woman who had dragged herself through hell. who had built herself out of shattered pieces. "You're not a fraud," he said firmly. "You're a survivor, and survivors aren't perfect. They're scarred. They're tested, but they endure." Sarah's breath shuddered. She wanted to believe him. She needed to, but the weight of what she had confessed was crushing her chest. "Doctor," Martinez stepped in again, her tone professional. "Lieutenant, I need to ask, these episodes you're having, are they increasing in frequency?" Sarah hesitated. Then she nodded. "More frequent, more intense. The meds don't hold as long. Today, I knew I was pushing the limit, and you rescheduled." "For deployment," Morrison cut in, his voice tightening. "Weren't you?" Her silence was confirmation enough. "What mission?" His voice carried the edge of command. Her lips parted reluctantly. "South China Sea, next week." The words hit him like a physical blow. The South China Sea was no routine assignment. It was volatile, high risk, the kind of deployment where a single mistake could ignite an international crisis. If she collapsed there, it wouldn't just be her life on the line. It would be her team, the mission, maybe more. Morrison's jaw clenched. "You know you can't deploy with this condition." Sarah's face crumpled, her voice breaking. "Please, don't take this. For me, the Navy is all I have without it. I'm nothing." Her words sliced through him. He had seen soldiers stripped of their careers before, watched them unravel when the only identity they had ever known was taken from them. But this was different. This was personal, Doctor. Martinez shifted, her tone deliberate. "Admiral, if I may, there might be another path." Both turned to her, eyes sharp with disbelief and desperate hope. "There's a new program," she continued carefully. "It's not public knowledge, experimental, designed for operators too valuable to lose, but too compromised for standard deployment. They're calling it Project Phoenix." Morrison frowned. He'd heard whispers, nothing concrete. What exactly does it involve? Cutting-edge treatment, pain management, modified duty designed around a soldier's strengths. It's meant to keep elite personnel in uniform when they'd otherwise face discharge. But, she glanced at Sarah, it requires full disclosure, complete transparency, no more secrets. Sarah's pulse quickened, a chance, a thread of hope, but at what cost? What kind of consequences? Morrison asked, his voice flat. "Disciplinary action, possible reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, confinement to base during treatment." She'd lose her spotless record, but she wouldn't be discharged. The room spun around Sarah, a choice. A chance to stay, but only if she gave up the one thing she had clung to for 15 years. The illusion of perfection. Morrison studied her face, his voice quiet, heavy with meaning. "It's your choice, Sarah. You can walk away now full honors, secrets intact, or you can tell the truth, risk everything, and fight to stay." Her hands trembled, her breath came shallow. She thought of the teddy bear waiting in her quarters, of the promise a young officer had made in a wreckage, of the years she had spent trying to prove herself worthy of survival. Her eyes lifted, burning with a fierce light. "I want to fight." The Admiral nodded slowly. His voice softened, but his words carried the weight of finality. "Then no more lies, no more deception. If we're going to save your career, we do it with complete honesty." Sarah exhaled, the weight of 15 years lifting and crashing. All at once. "Yes, sir." But deep inside, fear gnawed at her, because she knew honesty might save her career, but it might also destroy her. What does it feel like to stand in front of a room full of people who now know the lies you've lived by? Sarah had thought combat was the hardest test she'd ever endure. She had been wrong. For 3 weeks, her life became a tribunal. The hearings were brutal. Every detail of her deception dragged into the light. She stood in stiff uniforms before panels of senior officers, her scars hidden beneath the fabric but pulsing in her memory. She spoke of falsified medical forms, of forged signatures, of pills purchased in shadows. She admitted what she had sworn to bury forever. Each time she confessed, she felt something inside her crack wider. The perfect soldier was gone. In her place stood something raw, unarmored, exposed. But strangely, there was relief too. She had lived 15 years holding her breath, terrified of the day someone would find her out. And now, with every word spoken, with every secret stripped away, she felt the crushing weight of silence begin to lift. Admiral Morrison sat through every hearing, a silent anchor at the edge of the room. He never interrupted, never softened the questions that hammered at her. But when her knees trembled, when her voice faltered, she always found his eyes steady on her. Not condemning, not pitying, just present. That presence held her together more than she dared admit on the worst day, when the prosecutor's voice cut sharp across the chamber. "Lieutenant Chun, why should we trust a word you say now after 15 years of lies?" Sarah thought she might collapse. Her voice shook. "Because I'm not hiding anymore. Because I'd rather stand here stripped of everything than keep living a lie." The room went silent. Morrison didn't move. But in his chest, something shifted. He remembered the 7-year-old girl clinging to his hand in the wreckage, whispering that she didn't want to be alone. And he realized she was still that girl. Only now she was standing in fire without letting go. The review board didn't answer that day. They never did. Instead, they left her dangling, living in a strange purgatory, suspended between the soldier she had been and the unknown future waiting beyond judgment. Nights were the worst alone. In her quarters, medical leave orders pinning her to stillness. Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She hadn't known silence could be so loud. No training exercises, no missions. No adrenaline to push the pain into the background. Just her body. Just the scars. Just the truth. Some nights, she pressed her face into the worn fur of Mr. Anchors, the teddy bear that had followed her through every deployment, every barracks. She hadn't held him in years, hadn't allowed herself the weakness. But now, stripped of the soldier's mask, she found comfort in the anchor she had named as a child, and always her thoughts circled back to him. The Admiral, James Morrison, the man whose voice had once cut through the dark and kept her alive. The man who now sat silently while her entire career balanced on a knife's edge. Would he still see her as worth saving? Or had she betrayed his promise too? The days crawled until finally, Morrison summoned her. His office felt different this time. Less imposing, less distant. The morning light cut across the desk, falling on a stack of documents thick enough to change a life. He didn't make her wait. "Sarah," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit." She obeyed, her back stiff, hands clenched against her knees. She couldn't keep her eyes from the papers. "This," Morrison said, placing his hand on the stack, "is your future?" Her throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. "The review board has made their decision regarding Project Phoenix." The silence stretched. She braced for the words that would end her. But Morrison's eyes softened. "Before I tell you what they said, I need you to understand something." He leaned forward, his voice steady, deliberate. "The last 3 weeks have tested everything. Not just you, me, all of us. I've watched you strip bare of the image you built, forced to face every mistake, every deception. And I need you to hear this from me before you hear it from anyone else." Sarah swallowed hard, fighting tears. "You didn't fail, Morrison," said firmly. "You stood in fire. You told the truth when it could cost you everything. That's courage most people will never understand." Her chest shuddered, no commendation. No metal had ever pierced her the way those words did. Morrison lifted the top document, reading carefully. "The board was impressed by your service record. 15 years of exemplary duty. Commendations, flawless leadership, unbroken success." Her heart leapt until his voice hardened. But they were also troubled. The falsified records, the deception, the risk to your team. They cannot ignore it. Sarah's breath stopped. She felt the floor tilt under her. "However," Morrison continued, and her heart surged back to life. They were struck by something else. Your willingness to come forward, to admit everything, to risk your career for honesty. They saw strength in that, rare strength. He set the paper down. Project Phoenix has accepted you. The words hit her like a tidal wave. She blinked, stunned, unable to speak. Tears blurred her vision, but Morrison wasn't finished. There are conditions, significant ones. She nodded quickly. I accept. You haven't heard them yet, he warned. I don't care. I'll accept. His eyes flickered, almost amused, but his voice remained grave. You will be reduced in rank to lieutenant junior grade. You'll forfeit 6 months' pay. You'll be restricted to base for a year while you undergo treatment and evaluation. Her pulse pounded. A punishment. Yes, but still in uniform. Still Navy, still family. I accept, she whispered. Morrison's gaze didn't waver. Your role will change permanently. No more combat deployments. No more high-risk operations. You'll be reassigned to training, classroom, instruction. Passing on what you know, rather than carrying it into battle. The words should have gutted her. For 15 years, she had defined herself as the warrior on the front line. The one who led the charge, to be pulled back, caged behind walls, stripped of the danger she had thrived on. It should have felt like death, but something had shifted inside her during those long nights of silence. She realized she was tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of pushing her body past breaking just to prove she could. Her voice came out quiet, steady. I think I'd like that. Morrison's eyes searched hers. Really? She nodded slowly. For years, I thought strength was proving myself, proving I was unbreakable, but maybe strength is helping others find theirs. For the first time in weeks, Morrison smiled. Not the professional mask of an admiral, but something human, something proud. The board thought you might say that, he said. He slid the final paper across the desk. Sarah lifted it with trembling hands. Her eyes widened as she read the header. Naval Special Warfare Training Command. Instructor assignment. You'll train the next generation, Morrison explained. Not just in tactics, but in resilience, in determination, in survival. Who better to teach them than someone who's lived it? Sarah's chest swelled, a warmth she hadn't felt in years filling her ribs. For the first time since that night in the wreckage, she felt not broken, not hidden, but necessary. Morrison leaned back, his voice soft but firm. This is your last chance. No more lies, no more masks. If you accept this, you accept it fully, scars and all. She met his eyes, steady now, no tremor in her voice. Yes, sir, I can do that. He rose, circled the desk, and extended his hand. Then, welcome to your new career, Lieutenant Junior Grade Chung. Her hand shook as she grasped his, but it wasn't weakness. It was release. Her new path had begun. But deep inside, one fear lingered. Would the Navy, her family, ever truly see her scars as strength? Or would they always see her as broken? What happens when the battlefield is taken away, but the war inside you refuses to end? Sarah's first morning as an instructor began without fanfare. No deployment orders, no briefing room tension, no combat gear waiting at her locker. Instead, she stood in a quiet hallway outside a classroom at Naval Special Warfare Training Command, a thin folder in her hands, her heart pounding harder than it ever had on a mission. The folder bore her new orders. Instructor, Phase 2 Training, Urban Tactics, and Leadership. She stared at the words as though they belonged to someone else. Through the door, she could hear the low rumble of recruits settling in. Laughter, shuffling boots. The careless bravado of men and women who still believed they were invincible. She used to sound like that once, before scars, before secrets. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her. The uniform still fit, the insignia smaller now. Her rank reduced. She had accepted that, but the face looking back was older than her years. etched with sleepless nights and the weight of truths that couldn't be unlearned. She inhaled, felt the scar tissue pull tight beneath her ribs. A reminder, always a reminder. When she stepped inside, the room went silent. Dozens of eyes tracked her, sizing her up, some curious, some skeptical. They had expected a battle-hardened warrior, maybe someone with medals glittering on her chest. Instead, they got a woman with a quiet, controlled presence, eyes sharp but weary. Carrying herself with precision, she set the folder on the desk, let the silence hang a moment longer, then spoke. "Lieutenant, junior grade Sarah Chun." She didn't bother with her full history. That wasn't what they needed. "I'll be instructing you in urban tactics and small team leadership." A hand shot up in the back before she even finished. A tall recruit, with too much confidence in his grin. "Ma'am, have you ever actually led a team in combat?" Laughter rippled, the kind meant to test, to poke. Sarah didn't flinch, her gaze locked on the recruit. Calm but cutting. 15 years, multiple deployments, 0 failed missions. You'll forgive me if I don't list them like trading cards. The laughter died instantly. Silence pressed in. She continued. "This isn't about me. It's about you. My job isn't to prove myself anymore. It's to make sure you don't get your people killed because you thought you were invincible." Her words landed harder than any boast. The recruits shifted uneasily. She saw it in their faces, the realization that this instructor wasn't here to impress them. She was here to prepare them. The days that followed were grueling. Sarah drilled them with precision, teaching not just tactics but instincts. How to read a room, how to trust silence, how to make a decision when hesitation meant death. But teaching was different from leading. When she had been on missions, her body had been her weapon, her shield, her proof. Now, her body betrayed her daily. Pain flared in her ribs when she barked commands. Spasms knotted her muscles when she demonstrated breaching positions. She forced herself to hide it as best she could, biting down against the burn, stepping aside just long enough to let the recruits execute the drills instead. Still, they noticed. They always noticed one evening after drills, as the recruits filed out. A young woman lingered, brown eyes sharp, hair tied back tight, her stance respectful but firm. "Ma'am," she said, with respect, "you're hurting, aren't you?" Sarah froze. The instinct to deny rose immediately, the reflex she had honed for years. But something in the recruit's steady gaze stopped her. She exhaled slowly. "Yes." The recruit nodded, no judgment in her face. "Still, you don't quit. That's what I notice." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. Not pity, not doubt, recognition. When she returned to her quarters that night, she sat on the edge of her bunk and thought about what strength meant. For so long, it had been measured in silence, in hiding, in proving herself flawless. But maybe strength was something else entirely. Maybe it was standing, even when the pain screamed. Maybe it was admitting the truth and still stepping forward. Mr. Ankers sat on her dresser, his small sailor hat tilted to one side. She reached out, touched the worn fabric, and whispered, "I'm still fighting." Weeks passed, slowly. The recruit's skepticism turned into respect, not because she boasted of her past, but because she demanded something of them they had never been asked before. Honesty. "Every soldier has a weakness," she told him one morning. "The lie is pretending you don't. The strength is knowing it and fighting anyway." The words echoed in the sterile classroom, sinking deep into faces that had never been told it was acceptable to be human beneath the uniform. It was Morrison who came to see her one afternoon, stepping into the training bay as she corrected a recruit's stance on the firing line. His presence shifted the room immediately. Every recruit stiffened. "Carry on," Sarah said sharply, sending them back to their drills. When the noise rose again, Morrison approached. "You look different," he said quietly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Older already?" His mouth twitched into the smallest smile. "No, lighter. like someone carrying less weight. She considered the words, then nodded. Maybe I am. He studied her a moment longer, his expression unreadable. The board made the right choice. She looked at him, her voice softer now. You saved my life twice, Admiral. Once on that highway, once in that hearing room. I don't know how to repay that. His eyes softened. You already did. You became the soldier I always knew you could. Now you're becoming something more. Something more. The words stayed with her long after he left. That night, as the base quieted and recruits slept, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about her scars, about the pain that would never leave her, about the promises broken and kept. And she realized the battlefield had never really been out there. It had always been inside her. And for the first time, she believed she might be winning. How long could she keep her place before the system tried to take it back? Sarah had barely begun to find her rhythm as an instructor when the whispers started. They weren't loud, not yet. Just fragments drifting down corridors, murmurs in offices, where doors didn't quite close, but soldiers had instincts, and hers were sharper than most. She could feel the change in the air. Some officers doubted the decision. Doubts turned into questions. Questions turned into reports. Project Phoenix was still new, untested. And to the old guard, men who had never known injury beyond what could be stitched up in the field, Sarah Chun's presence looked less like resilience and more like risk. She was their first test case, and in the Navy, test cases were fragile things. One morning, Morrison called her to his office. She entered with her usual precision, but the atmosphere was different, heavy, tense. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slid a thin folder across the desk. She hesitated before picking it up. Inside were transcripts, her own words from the tribunal, her admissions, her failures. Her stomach dropped. Who's asking for this? Command review, Morrison said flatly. Some in Washington aren't convinced Phoenix should exist at all. They see you as proof that the system failed. Her throat tightened. They're trying to make me an example. They're trying to decide if Project Phoenix is worth funding, and whether you're worth the risk. The words cut deeper than any scar. For a long moment, she stared at the transcripts, her own voice staring back at her in cold black. Type: I falsified records. I forged signatures. I purchased unregulated medication. Every failure she'd tried to bury now lived in a file on someone's desk in D.C., waiting to be dissected by strangers. What do they want from me? She asked quietly. Morrison's eyes held hers. Proof that you can still serve, that you're more than a mistake in their system. Her chest tightened. Proof, always proof. She had spent her entire career proving she wasn't broken, proving she was worthy of the promise. And now, when she had finally begun to shed the weight of that need, it came back, sharper than ever. Then let me prove it, she said fiercely. His voice dropped, steady, deliberate. Not like before, not by hiding, not by forcing yourself past the breaking point. This time, you prove it by being who you are now. She wanted to believe that was enough. She wasn't sure it would be. The test came sooner than she expected. 2 weeks later, she was summoned to an evaluation exercise on paper. It was routine. Instructors demonstrating tactics for review by senior officers, but she knew what it was, a stage. A chance for command to watch her under pressure, waiting to see if she would falter. The recruits didn't know. To them, it was just another day. The scenario was simple, a mock urban assault. Small teams breaching and clearing under her direction. She set the stage, gave commands, and stepped back as they moved. But she could feel the eyes on her, heavy from the observation deck above. Men in suits and uniforms who had never trained under her, never seen her bleed, but were ready to decide her future in a single glance. Halfway through the drill, one recruit fumbled. His timing was off, his entry sloppy. The room erupted in chaos, shouts, tangled movements. Hesitation where there should have been precision. Sarah's instincts surged. She stepped forward, barked sharp corrections, pulled them back into rhythm. Her voice cut through the noise. Her presence steady, anchoring, but pain flared in her ribs as she moved too quickly, her body reminding her of its limits. She felt the spasm building, her breath catching. For a moment, panic surged, the old reflex to hide, to cover, to swallow the weakness before anyone could see. She froze. One decision, she could pretend, force it down, and hope no one noticed, or she could do the unthinkable, acknowledge it in front of recruits, in front of command. Her chest heaved. She made her choice. "Williams," she snapped, pointing to the nearest recruit. "Take over my position." The young man blinked, stunned, then obeyed. Sarah stepped back, hand pressed subtly to her side, her voice steady even as her body trembled. She shifted into an oversight role, calling corrections, guiding, letting them carry the execution while she commanded. The drill ended clean, messy in the middle, but finished with discipline. When the recruits dispersed, still sweating, she stood alone at the edge of the bay. She could feel the judgment from above, though she didn't look up. Later, in the privacy of Morrison's office, he delivered the verdict. "They saw it," he said. "I know." Her voice was flat. "They saw you falter. They saw you step back." Her throat closed, so this was it. Proof she was broken. Proof she didn't belong. Then Morrison's voice softened. "And they saw you adapt. They saw you trust your team. They saw you lead, even when your body wouldn't let you fight." Sarah's head snapped up. "They didn't see weakness," Morrison continued. "They saw something rare. An officer who knows her limits and still gets the mission done." Her breath shuddered. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her ribs like hunger. And Washington? "They're not convinced," Morrison admitted. "But they're watching closely, which means every move you make from here on out matters. Every move, every breath, every step. Still under a microscope, still balanced on the edge. That night, lying awake in her quarters, Sarah stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "What if I'm not enough?" The silence answered, heavy and suffocating. Then her eyes fell on the small bear sitting upright on her dresser, Mr. Anchors, his button eyes worn, his sailor hat tilted, a relic of promises made in the wreckage. She picked him up, pressed him to her chest, and whispered again, "I'm still here. I'm still fighting." The storm hadn't passed. The system still doubted her, still circled like sharks sensing blood. But she knew something now she hadn't known before. Strength wasn't silence. Strength was standing even when every eye watched, even when the truth showed, and she wasn't standing alone, not anymore. What would you risk to protect someone from making your mistakes? The pressure from Washington never stopped. The whispers turned into memos. The memos into directives. Every week, Morrison handed Sarah another thin folder, another set of notes. From unseen evaluators dissecting her performance like a specimen under glass. They tracked everything: her physical condition, her teaching methods, her emotional resilience. Every success was questioned, every stumble magnified. She had survived firefights easier than this, but the recruits were different. They didn't care about Washington's politics or Project Phoenix's fragile existence. They cared about surviving, about learning how to fight and how to live long enough to come home. And in the classroom, Sarah found something she hadn't expected, herself reflected back in their faces. The bravado of the young men trying to mask fear with laughter. The quiet intensity of the women determined to prove they belonged. The flicker in their eyes when exhaustion hit, but pride wouldn't let them stop. She saw them all, because she had been all of them once. And she saw the danger too. One evening, after a long day of breaching drills, she lingered in the bay, watching her recruits pack gear. Two young men whispered near the back, their voices carrying, "I've got something stronger than the base stuff. Helps when the pain won't quit." Sarah's blood ran cold. She stepped forward sharply. "What did you just say?" The recruits froze, eyes wide. The taller one stammered, "Ma'am, it's nothing, just caffeine tabs, that's all." But she knew the look. She had worn it herself once, when a pill bottle rattled in her hand, and she told herself it was the only way forward. She dismissed the others, kept the two behind. Their names, Davis and Parker, young, reckless, both with the kind of desperate energy that tried to outrun fear. "Sit," she ordered. They obeyed, nervous under her gaze. She folded her arms, scars tugging beneath her uniform, and stared at them until the silence grew heavy. "You think pain makes you weak," she said finally. "You think hiding it makes you strong." "I know, because I thought the same." They shifted, glancing at each other. Sarah leaned forward, her voice sharper now. "Listen to me, that path will destroy you. The drugs don't fix the pain. They bury it. And one day, they stop working, and the pain comes back worse. And by then, you're owned by them. Not a soldier, just a body trying to survive another hour." Their eyes widened. They weren't expecting this, not from her. She exhaled slowly. The hardest words pressed at her throat, words she had never said aloud too. "Anyone but Morrison and Dr. Martinez. I know, because I did it. For 15 years, I lied to the system. I bought pills in shadows. I told myself I was proving my strength. And all I was doing was running from the truth. Don't make my mistake." The recruits stared at her, stunned. She had stripped herself bare. Not with scars this time, but with honesty. Finally, Davis whispered, "Then what do we do?" "The pain's real. The pressure's real." Sarah held his gaze. "You tell the truth. You get help. You lean on your team instead of hiding from them. Strength isn't silence. It's trust." The words cost her more than they could ever know. Later that night, she filed an incident report, quiet but precise, protecting the names while addressing the problem. She thought she could contain it, but nothing stayed hidden for long. A week later, Morrison summoned her again. His office felt heavier this time, his expression unreadable. "You spoke to your recruits," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "You admitted to them what you admitted in this room weeks ago." Her chest tightened. "They needed to hear it. If I don't stop them, they'll walk the same path I did." His jaw flexed. "Do you know what command will do if they hear you sharing your violations with trainees?" She swallowed hard. "They'll use it to prove their point, that I don't belong here, that Phoenix is a liability." "Exactly." His voice was steel. "You're walking a razor's edge, Sarah. One misstep, and I lose everything." She finished, her voice sharp. "I know." Silence hung between them. Morrison finally exhaled, shoulders heavy. "Why did you do it?" Her eyes burned. She clenched her fists, fighting for words. "Because I couldn't watch them become me. Because I saw the same look in their eyes, the same desperation. And if I let them go down that road, then everything I've endured means nothing." The Admiral's face softened, just slightly. He knew the truth in her words. He had seen too many young soldiers destroyed by silence, by pride, by the belief that weakness must be hidden. But Washington wouldn't care about that truth. They would see only risk that night. Sarah lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, Mr. Anchors tucked under her arm. The choice loomed heavy. Protect her recruits and risk losing her fragile second chance, or protect herself and watch them repeat her sins. The old Sarah, the one who built her life on silence, would have chosen survival, but the woman she was becoming knew there was only one answer. The next morning, she called her recruits together. They stood in formation, sharp and expectant, waiting for orders. Instead, she gave them something else. "You've been told strength is never showing weakness," she said. "That's a lie. Strength is standing anyway, even when everyone sees your scars. If you remember nothing else from me, remember this. Honesty will save more lives than bravery ever will." Her voice cracked. She let it. The recruits stood in silence, their young faces shifting. Some confused, some thoughtful. Some moved in ways they didn't yet understand. She knew Washington wouldn't like it. She knew command would circle. Closer. She knew she was making herself a target again. But for the first time, she didn't care. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What does redemption look like when the world still doubts you? The summons came at dawn. Sarah was ordered to report to the command hall. No explanation. No details. Just a time, a uniform, and the weight in her chest that told her this was the moment she had been bracing for. The corridors felt longer than usual as she walked. Recruits saluted as she passed. Some with respect, some with uncertainty. She returned each one, her face calm, though her stomach twisted with dread. Morrison was waiting outside the hall. His face gave nothing away, his stance as rigid as always. But when their eyes met, she caught the faintest flicker, steady. Grounding the way it had been in the wreckage all those years ago. You ready? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. Good, he said. It means you're not lying to yourself anymore. Inside, the room was austere. A long table. Senior officers seated in crisp uniforms, their faces carved from stone. At the center sat a civilian, a representative from Washington. His suit looked out of place against the rows of military decorations. Sarah stood at attention, her pulse pounding. The chairman of the board spoke first. Lieutenant Junior Grade Chun, you've been under evaluation for 3 months today. We deliver our findings. Her hands clenched at her sides. The civilian leaned forward, voice cool, detached. Your case has raised significant concern. Falsified records, illegal medications, 15 years of deception. Some argue you've jeopardized the integrity of this institution. The words sliced clean. She stood taller, refusing to flinch. But, the chairman continued, others argue your service record is exemplary, your leadership beyond reproach, and your conduct during evaluation has revealed qualities that cannot be measured in a file. A pause. The silence stretched until Sarah thought it might crush her. Project Phoenix was designed for soldiers like you. Not perfect, but persistent. Scarred, but unbroken. We have decided you will remain in service. Her breath caught. Relief surged through her chest until the civilian raised a hand. With conditions. Of course, there were always conditions. You will remain restricted from combat deployments. You will continue in your role as instructor, and every month, your progress will be reviewed. Fail once, and the program ends. Sarah nodded sharply. Yes, sir. The civilian's gaze sharpened. One more matter. Reports have reached us that you disclosed your own violations to recruits, that you spoke openly of your misconduct. Morrison stiffened beside her. Sarah's throat tightened. Yes, she said simply. Gasps whispered down the table. The civilian's eyes narrowed. Do you realize what that means? You've undermined your own authority, exposed them to conduct unbecoming of an officer. Sarah's voice came steady, quiet but unyielding. No, sir. I showed them the truth. I showed them what happens when you hide pain instead of facing it. If that undermines me, then I accept it. But if even one recruit chooses honesty instead of the path I took, then it was worth it. The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Morrison's voice cut through the stillness, sharp and commanding. Gentlemen, with respect, this is exactly why Phoenix exists. Not just to keep soldiers in uniform, but to redefine strength. If you strip her of this, you strip the program of its purpose. The words carried weight. 35 years of service lent him a gravity no civilian could dismiss. The chairman finally nodded. The board will accept your conduct as a matter of instruction, not violation. But understand this, Lieutenant, you walk a narrow line. Do not cross it again. Sarah exhaled slowly. Understood. The session ended. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, officers filed out. Sarah stood frozen, the words still echoing in her chest. You will remain in service. Morrison waited until the room was empty, then turned to her. His voice softened. You did it. Her throat tightened. No, we did it. He shook his head. You faced them alone. You spoke the truth when it could have destroyed you. That was you, Sarah, not me. For the first time, she let herself believe it. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm, training, teaching, guiding recruits who began to look at her not with suspicion, but with something deeper. Respect not for perfection, but for honesty. One evening, after drills, the young woman who had once asked if Sarah was hurting approached her again. She hesitated, then spoke. Ma'am, when you said strength is standing even when everyone sees your scars, I think I finally understood. Thank you. Sarah swallowed hard, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Pride, not the brutal kind built on silence, but the kind born from truth. That night, in her quarters, she opened the drawer where Anchors lay wrapped in tissue. She lifted him gently, setting him on the desk. The little sailor hat still crooked, the fabric worn thin. She whispered, I'm not hiding anymore. The room was quiet, but it felt lighter than it ever had before. Later, Morrison stopped by. He lingered in the doorway, watching her a moment before stepping inside. Funny thing, he said, when I made that promise on Highway 9, I thought it was just words, something to comfort a dying child. I never thought it would follow me for the rest of my life. Sarah smiled faintly. And now? He studied her, his expression soft, proud. Now, I realize it wasn't me keeping the promise. It was you. Every day you fought. Every day you stood. You kept it. You saved yourself. Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak, so she just nodded. As he turned to leave, he paused. You know, the anchor held through every storm, just like I told you it would. When he was gone, Sarah sat alone in the quiet. She thought about the girl in the wreckage, broken and bleeding, clutching a stranger's hand. She thought about the soldier who had built herself on silence, desperate to be unbreakable. And she thought about the woman she was now, scarred. Yes, but stronger than she had ever believed possible, and she understood at last. Strength had never been about hiding. It had never been about proving. It had always been about standing, scars and all, and saying, I am still here. She reached for Anchors, set him upright on her desk, and let the quiet settle around her, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.